So today I have with me Kris Anderson, and you are the owner and proprietor of Earthling Media. Is that correct?
Yep, that's me.
And recently you just finished up a project with your brother, and that project is a documentary called Unbecoming. And I checked out that documentary, and actually I was watching a live podcast with Julian Dory, and he was talking about the Trump assassination attempt. And you were in his chat room, and you threw up there a $5 bill and said, "Hey, check out this documentary." And I was like, "Hey, cool." And I checked it out, and then I was like, "Wow, I got to talk to this guy." And I wanted to talk as soon as I talked to your brother and found out he was a twin. I wanted to talk to you too. And I was like, man, the love that you guys share is pretty evident in the documentary.
You're not going to find anybody much closer to you than your biological identical twin. So it's a special relationship. I love my brother more than almost anybody, and we could get into it. But when I saw what he was going through, and just the fact that he wasn't even allowed to talk about it, right? As this was happening, he was under essentially a gag order, and he was not permitted to discuss it with anybody that wasn't his lawyer. So, you know, me and other family members are looking at him, and we could tell there's something seriously, seriously distressing him. And, we would get vague hints here and there, but, he would have broken the law if he straight up told us, I'm under internal affairs investigation for bullshit, which is precisely what it was. And, throughout that process, um, it was such a unique position that he was in, right? Because my brother had been at that department for 17 years, and he was their de facto social media guy, camera guy, who had all the footage, right? That he was tasked with, in many cases, taking a lot of videos and preserving documents. So the fact that they would try to do this to him, it just boggles the mind. It is astounding that they thought they could get away with essentially a smear campaign when this is the guy that's holding all the receipts. So I'm not sure how much more you want to get into the documentary. I know you talked about that in pretty in depth with Karl, but
Yeah.
making it for me was a labor of love. And once I saw it, it was a story that blew my mind. And the fact that this is happening to my twin brother, I recognized immediately this is a story that needs to be told. This is a cast of characters, and they are giving me a performance that I need to show the world, right? Especially these young officers that thought they were gonna try to stage a coup and a mutiny against him to jam him up for some complete nonsense. When I heard it was probably over 6 hours of internal affairs investigation footage that I had come through, and trying to condense that and convey the story, which was a very complex story, and it required telling a lot of history, giving a lot of background. But as soon as I heard, I think it was Carl's, the other sergeant there, his name was Hansack. Um, I think it was listening to his IA interview that I knew there's a story to be told here, and it's much bigger than just my brother. It's much bigger than this department. This is a nationwide issue that needs to
Yeah, it
be.
really is. It really
Yeah.
is. And it's not just with police departments either. I've come across that issue numerous times in my personal life. Um, as a matter of fact, I was telling Karl when we did that interview, I was telling him that I've dealt with it recently. I was accused of being racist because I asked somebody where they were from
Mm,
because there was an obvious language barrier.
hmm.
And so there is, with the language barriers in Asia specifically, there are parts of the world that are culturally similar to us. Japan is Western, and that's more of what I was going for. Is there's an obvious language barrier, but if I can speak to this person culturally, maybe we can come together and have an understanding. And as soon as I asked, "Where are you from?" she hung up on me, and it set a chain of events in motion that I can't stop. I'm still dealing with this issue, and this conversation between me and this lady happened a year ago, and I'm still dealing with the effects of that issue today. And I come across numerous people every day when I go to talk to somebody on this podcast. I'm the most common heard phrase that I hear is I can't talk because I'm afraid to lose my job.
Yeah, that's a
And
very common refrain in
yeah,
2024.
and it's exactly in 2024, like, 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't have been afraid to lose a job over something that we said because we're all really like, even in 2024, the divide isn't as bad as people think it is. I think social media exacerbates that divide a lot. And
100%.
I noticed that you and Christian aren't even on social media. You have
I'm
Instagram, and that's pretty much it.
I'm Christian. And yeah, I
Are
made
you?
a.
I'm sorry. I
It's
apologize.
okay. It happens all the time. So I don't fault you one bit. It comes with the trade of being a twin. You get used to it. But no, back in 2016, when the rhetoric was just getting so heated, it was really, I think, my first foray into content creation. I had, I'd been watching the lead up to the election, the presidential election of 2016, and looking back on a lot of Trump's comments historically, where he would praise Nancy Pelosi, he would praise Harry Reid, he would say that I support abortion, I support gay marriage, I support Chris Jenner, or what is it, Chris Jenner?
Yeah, yeah. Bruce, Chris, yeah.
Caitlin. I support.
Caitlin.
Yes, I support Caitlin using whatever bathroom she prefers to use. So Trump, as a candidate running on the Republican ticket, was a very liberal candidate, and I noticed this, so I cut together this video. I'm a big movie fan. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie The Usual Suspects with Kevin
Yeah,
Spacey.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's that reveal at the end where the investigator is figuring out, oh, this guy just played me nonstop throughout this entire interview. So I set it up as, Trump is running on the ticket, and then ultimately it reveals he's a secret Democrat that just got elected to the White House, and he pulled a fast one on the entire Republican base. To me, that was funny, right? And it was kind of apolitical, and it was poking fun at both sides, and because every candidate is going to say whatever they feel is necessary to get elected. So I published this video, and it's got the final reveal where you know Kevin Spacey's gait starts improving, his legs straighten out, and I published that on Facebook, and it was a very good response. People thought it was funny, which was the intended purpose. But random people who now, in with the benefit of hindsight, I'm fairly certain could have been bots or could have been people that were paid, started uh, telling me that I needed to check my privilege, and the assertion was that, or the inference was that this video was somehow racist, right? Because it was really just making light of the whole absurdity of politics in 2016. And that interaction, look, man, I've grown up in Miami, which is probably the most diverse city on the planet. I've been friends with everybody, and people who knew me growing up would describe me as a pretty militant anti-racist, and the assertion that I was being in any way racist really rubbed me the wrong way, and that kind of convinced me to just take a step back from social media entirely, because it's a very toxic place, and just the rhetoric, boomers are screaming about this issue, the millennials are screaming about that issue, and it's just all very like normie behavior that I just got sick of. So I
Yeah.
bounced out. I made a decision to get off of social media then and there. Now I've kept more recently, as I'm delving into the fore in media production. We need websites, we need social media, we need to be able to have channels to communicate our content. So I have recently reactivated Facebook, reactivated Instagram. I'm hardly ever on there though. It's just a matter of personal preference for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I hate social media myself. Something similar happened to me on Twitter. Um, and it wasn't even a post that I made. It was a post that I had commented on. Just I don't even remember what it was. It was something mild and innocuous. I'm sure it wasn't anything that should bother anybody. But within an hour, I had inbox messages. I had so many comments, people telling me to off myself and people telling me to do this and do that and check the white privilege type of thing. And I'm like, man, I don't see this division when I walk outside my front door. I
No
don't
way,
see
man.
this. Yeah, I don't see it when we go to the bar, and there's different kinds of music playing, different kinds of people there. There's no division. We're all just hanging out together, and I have noticed that a lot. I talk about it a lot on the podcast about how I don't think the division is as bad as everybody thinks it is. I think
Nope.
just a lot of people are on social media looking at, you know, echo chambers and people that agree with them. And then when they go outside of the house, they forget, oh, I don't have a keyboard or a screen in front of me, so I better not say these things or I better not do these things.
Yeah, it's 100% manufactured as far as I'm concerned, and it is intentionally so by, probably China, probably Russia, and probably some other, countries that we consider allies. And it's a game, right? Because they understand that we as a populace are weaker if we are at each other's throats and
Now
arguing
that's
over complete
interesting that
bullshit.
you brought that up. It's a very interesting that you brought that up because that happens all day long, every day. China, Russia, and like you said, probably some of our allies too. They they don't have to work very hard at that. They
No.
just have to interject an idea or two online and watch it take off. And people are not they're not especially I've noticed this a lot with the boomer generation. They don't get off the internet to research the things that they're reposting.
Hmm. They'll
So
take a
like
Facebook post at face value and just
exactly.
assume this is all true. And man, before I exited social media, I was a very vocal critic of people that would post this complete nonsense on both sides. I would call it out when I saw it because, again, some of these people I would consider my friends, and it's very alarming to know that they would buy into such blatant propaganda. And again, both sides are guilty of this, right?
Yeah.
And as far an example in recent memory is Trump's attempted assassination, which you had one side immediately calling bullshit and saying, "Oh no, this was staged. This was you know
I
this was a."
actually my
Go ahead.
wife is my wife is very intelligent and we were watching I just finished up an interview and went in to watch the news. And when I saw Trump with blood on his face, I'll admit, man, I shed a tear. Um, it hit me just in the feels, My wife is very intelligent, and she had made the remark like, none of this looks real. Well, like none of this looks, like it all looks staged and not real. And I was like, how many presidents have you seen, attempted assassinate? How many times have you seen that in your life? And she says, well, none really. And I said, yeah, we don't really know what the hell we're looking at. Like we only know the story that they're telling us. And
Hmm.
like, I can see with my own two eyes, this happened on live television. Like it's
But I
because of what
empathize with
happened.
her. I
Yeah.
empathize with her just because of the absurdity of it. Like, we don't expect to see presidential candidates targeted on live television. Had this gone any other way, had he not moved his head that few centimeters, we would have seen brain matter on
Yeah.
national TV. Which
Yeah.
maybe some would argue that was fake if that happened. But dude, we were so, and it was such a an absurd moment in American politics. I don't blame her for thinking. Yeah, I don't blame anybody for thinking. Is there something more to this? Because probably yes, probably there is something. I'm not that he staged it, not that, but the would-be assassin. has all of the characteristics that you saw happen in the 1960s, right? This
Yeah,
guy,
yeah,
and if I were going to be conspiratorial, which I try to avoid, but I can't not see the patterns, right? This you know, unsympathetic, has no friends, young, impressionable guy that, look, man, there is a non-zero possibility that he was targeted and manipulated by an intelligence agency, whether
absolutely.
it's Iran or whether it's us. Crazier things have happened, and provably so. So
Yeah.
it was just a bonkers situation. So I don't fault anybody for looking at that and thinking, man, what's going on here?
And it comes down to media, right? I mean, every day when we're being lied to by the media on purpose, it's it's hard not to come up with those conclusions when you've got one side of the media preaching this thing, this side of the media preaching this thing, and you have to come up with what's true. And you're supposed to get that from the media. You're supposed to get that truth from Fox News, from CNN. That's what they're there for. But ultimately, it seems like the more we go on with this 24-hour news cycle, it just perpetuates a bunch of nonsense and
Yeah,
half truths and covered up lies. And it just it boils down to social media and misdirection. We're all being led down a path to believe one way or the other when we should be able to just decipher what's real and what's not in real time. But it's almost impossible these days. We have to do so much research based on what this person said, what this person said, and what this person said, so we can come up with a half-ass semblance of truth to run on, so we can elect in November on a party to run the entire country. And like, let's be honest. I don't know how Donald Trump's uh, presidency went. But I'm fairly sure that with the Biden administration, Biden wasn't running things. I believe the party was running things. And that's where it comes down to believability. You got Grandpa Joe up on the stage saying, we did this, we did this, we did this. Did you really, though? Was it you or was it your administration? Because I don't know if you can do anything.
yeah, and because of these institutions, specifically the media, being captured by literally one side, right? And I'm not a big proponent of regulations, but back up until the 70s, the FCC used to regulate political speech on TV and
Yeah.
the media in general. You had to give equal airtime to opposing sides, and man, I would love to see something like that come into place just to keep the media honest, because they've gotten so entrenched in the political divide, and again, all on one side, that we're never going to know who exactly was calling the shots during Biden's administration. What we do know is that they orchestrated the most brazen coup in American politics that we've ever seen. And you know he had all of the electoral votes to be the presumptive nominee, or to be the literal nominee, and that was usurped from him, by basically the media and basically the donor class. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like that in American politics, where Kamala Harris, now the nominee, nobody voted for her. So this is the party that loves to preach about, oh, we're defending democracy, we're saving democracy. Look at what you just did, right? You just took the spot from Joe Biden and gave it to Kamala without anybody voting on it, which
With
to
no
me
due
is
process. Yeah.
no due process, which is insane. And I don't think Biden was a good candidate at all. But these types of things need to be decided by the electorate, not the power brokers and media. It's
Yeah,
it, it
I actually heard something about uh that a vote for Biden was a vote for Harris because she was on the same ticket. That's just something I've heard repeated in the media, and I'm sure that's how some of them would justify that in their heads and be like, well, they did technically vote for Harris because, Biden was the incumbent at that time. And uh, I just, you are exactly right. I don't know. It's hard to come up. It's hard not to come up with conspiratorial ideas when you see that stuff happening,
There's
and
no
then
conspiracy. Like
and then
a
they
lot of
lie to you
people.
about it.
Yep, and now there's all this revisionism about, oh, Kamala was never the border czar. When, yeah, Axios was publishing, there's Trump is attacking Kamala's record on the border, even though she was never the border czar. When they literally themselves, Axios themselves, use that term to describe her, and it's just the gaslighting. I think is no longer viable. The American people on all sides see through it, and look, man, whether you're for one side or the other, I try to be very neutral when it comes to politics. I grew up very left leaning. I actually did political polls for MoveOn.org, and you could argue we helped put Obama in the White House because I don't know how familiar you are with those political polls where you get a call and they'll ask you, if the election were held today, would you be supporting this candidate or this candidate? Now,
Yeah,
some of those are done. They need to be treated very very stringently because it's data analysis, it's statistical analysis that they use to come up with these figures. But some campaigns will employ what are called push pollers, and I didn't know this at the time, but that was who I was working for. The surveys were structured and written in such a way to sway the respondent, the person who is answering the questions, to one side of the argument. And you would read just these diatribes of what if you knew that this candidate said this and this and this and this? And again, the intent behind those polls was to move your respondent further to your preferred side. And, at the time, I was 17, 18 years old doing those surveys. I just read the script that was in front of me. But it wasn't until, I got a little bit older that I realized what I was doing. I was doing push polling. But even still, I stayed a very loyal supporter to Democrat left leaning causes throughout the entirety of my 20s. But man, it's like Bill Maher says, I didn't leave the party. They left me. That's genuinely how I feel. And I think
that's
he,
how I feel as well. I've not aligned myself with any particular political party over the years. Because I just didn't have the knowledge of what I am, what I think, how I think, which camp I belong in. Um, I've always been more like a libertarian, is how people would describe me when I'd ask them, like, how would you describe my political leanings? And they'd say libertarian. And that's mostly because I'm of the mind like, hey, you go over and do whatever you want, leave me alone, let me do whatever I want. And that's libertarian stuff.
yeah. And
And
I agree with a lot of libertarian principles. Some of them I think are pretty batshit crazy, but we don't have to
yeah,
we don't have to get into it. But no, I think everybody needs to take a more nuanced look at what we're being fed and take a step back, remove yourself from the hyperbole and the inflammatory rhetoric, and just look at things objectively. And that's what I try to do. And but I have a lot of liberal friends that are constantly sending me stuff like, Trump did this, he said that, and look, man, oftentimes when I dig into it a little deeper, it's again just the media concocting a narrative that they want people to buy, like they've historically done. So I've come to deeply distrust and resent most people in the media, and that's also kind of the inspiration behind, you know, getting into media production. We try to keep it when there are political elements to our story. We try to play it right down the center, and we don't try to advocate for one side or the other. In my brother's case with the documentary, Karl was not a political guy, but the politics chose him, and they chose to seek him out for destruction. And
yeah.
you know, so a story like that, politics are unavoidable. But again, we tried to keep it very right down the center.
Yeah, that's kind of how I got interested in wanting to do podcasting as well is I I needed a voice. you know. Um, when I was a kid, I was always interested in broadcast journalism. Siskel and Ebert were I was watching Siskel and Ebert when I was like 7, 8. Like kids kids don't normally watch those type of things, especially with old white guys,
Yeah.
you know.
You're a
And
big movie buff?
I am, as a matter of fact. So I haven't been too much into movies the last few years because they've all kind of not been great. But pre-COVID, I was huge movie buff, and yeah, I love everything to do with movies and production. And now that I'm into podcasting, this is I have an amazing time doing this stuff. It's a lot of fun, but I can also speak my mind and be who I am. And that's something that I don't see in the media on television. I see it on YouTube. I see it on Twitter. I see it on Facebook, Rumble. I see people out there in independent media
Yeah.
able to be themselves. And in the last 4 years, the only time I watch TV is to watch sports.
You had brought up Julian Dory, and I'm a huge fan of his work, and
He's my favorite podcaster.
I would put him up there. Probably Joe Rogan, uh, then probably Julian. Quite frankly, I think
I'd have to say sometimes Julian's a lot better because like Rogan goes up and he talks about what he wants to talk about. And I
sure,
think I
sure,
think Julian's more interested in the story.
yeah. And I started following him basically from nothing. He was just a guy in his parents' basement doing
Trend
it,
of
and
Fire days.
yeah, and I have a lot of respect for his takes, and I've got a lot of admiration because most podcasters, again, they try to avoid falling into you know political traps. They try to avoid you know uh, what's the word? They try to avoid alienating their audience because
Yeah.
that's their living. But I was so proud when he came out and just a full throated condemnation of the divisive politics that led to the near assassination of Trump. When he said that, I can't recall any other time where he has entered into overt political speech. But uh, again, I think he's an honest guy, and maybe I'm sure there are a lot of things that I would not agree with him on, but I think he's one of the few podcasters that is not afraid to say it like it is, and that's why I've got tremendous respect. That's why I'm happy to support him with super chats, and if there's any benefit to people seeing those and following us, then so be it. But I'm just happy to support him and sing his praises because again, I think very few people are going to be as honest as him and go into depth. I before we started rolling, we were talking about UFOs, and I don't know if you were following that controversy. Julian has had James Fox. He's had a lot of people in ufology come in and give very compelling stories. But then I remember seeing first on Reddit this story about MH370, the
Yeah.
Malaysian Airlines, and I remember it lived for a couple of weeks and died soon thereafter on Reddit. But then it was resurrected and brought to Twitter by this one character who I don't need to mention his name, but this guy, I look if
I
he
can't even
literally,
remember his name. So I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember his name. He was on Julian Dory's podcast as well as
yep,
Danny Jones.
yeah, and he made a complete embarrassment of himself, and credit to Julian and Danny. Um, they were not combative, right? They just were asking questions, and his reaction to being asked honest questions, he took it as an attack. He took it as yeah, and just that story in particular. When I first saw those MH370 videos, it looked half compelling to me, but I know not to believe a lot of the media that we see. I know things can be easily faked, and in that case, I think it was faked. But he took that, you know, few seconds of footage and built an entire identity, an online persona out of it. And if it turned out to be untrue, then that's your reputation gone, right? And I think it was that guy's unwillingness to compromise and you know, take constructive criticism that kind of turned me off to the world of UFOs a little bit, because there's some very strong personalities in that community, and there are some pretty wacky theories. But on the subject of UFOs itself, I think there likely are craft that are invading our airspace with impunity. I think they've been around and interacted with us for a long, long time. But I don't know, what are your thoughts? Are you a UFO guy? You believe in?
Uh, I live, eat, sleep, and breathe UFOs, brother. And I tell you why. It's not because I'm not a weirdo, but it's entertainment for me. Um, we grew up in a generation where it's all those ideas aren't far-fetched to us, but the media has basically brought us up to believe. And in my opinion, I'm not going to think like little green men until I see proof. Um, but it's so ridiculous to think that there's not another life form out there. It's impossible to think that it's impossible for another life form to be more advanced than we are. It is just ridiculous. Even on this planet, I believe that there could be, like, you've heard Yeti, Bigfoot stories.
Mhm.
I don't believe in Bigfoot per se, but I believe there could be animals on this planet that we don't know about, and because of that, I'm more leaning towards uh, it's possible, but until I see it, I can't really make that determination because my government's lied to me about it so much.
Sure, and I think they absolutely have lied to us. I think it's provable that they've omitted things. I think Roswell was the beginning of it,
That's one of
and
my favorite stories, man.
yeah. And look, I'm a pretty nuts and bolts kind of guy. I try to look at things very objectively, but you cannot discount some of the witness testimony from very credible observers. So that's why I'm open to the possibility, and yeah, I think there are historical references in many world religions. In the Bible, I think in some cases might be talking about a another form of intelligence. So it's
Yeah, that's very interesting to get into the biblical stuff, because a lot of the things that we're seeing nowadays, like there's historical record going back thousands of years of seeing these things.
sure.
And you take you take all the stories that we've heard, the biblical stories, and then you take the, like, the parting of the Red Sea. There's evidence that that really happened, you know, and that's insane. That is insane to think about. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I do copious amounts of drugs. And and that's what the sign up behind me, coffee with bearded bad dad. I'm not known as the best father on earth, but I love my kids. My kids love me. And that's how we came to, I'm a stay-at-home dad, been a stay-at-home dad for 10 years.
Awesome.
And that's where the name for the show came from, is I've been accused of being a bad dad.
I'm sure
And
you're a terrific dad.
thank you. Thank you. But I do sometimes do, my body weight in drugs, and uh
What kind of
mushrooms,
drugs are we talking about? Oh, psychedelics.
psychedelics. Now, like, I smoke cannabis daily, and I use it I used to use recreationally quite a bit when I was younger, but it's more of a medication type thing now. I don't use near as much as I used to, but it's every day.
Is it
And
legal where you live? The
yes, yeah,
cannabis? Okay,
yes.
very cool.
It's so we live in Missouri, just about an hour north of Kansas City. It's been
Okay.
legal here for recreational use for like 2 or 3 years, but medicinally, 4 or 5 years now, but I've been a daily smoker for like 20. So
Yeah,
it's
I used to smoke every day throughout my high school years, and this is the first time I'm admitting this on camera, but I was a pretty in middle school. I was dropping gel tabs of LSD and kind of experiencing altered states of consciousness, and I thought there was value to it, and I don't regret it at all. But I don't think at this stage of my life that's something I need necessarily.
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
you've already gotten that experience that I mean, essentially, you don't need the experience, but it is eye-opening.
I think just that shift in your frame of reference is immensely valuable. Some people, I would argue, should be forced to take a heroic dose of some LSD or psilocybin or some other psychedelic just to, you know, shake them out of some of their core beliefs that they've it it is an eye-opening experience. And I used to tell myself I'll start smoking weed again when I have $10 million in the bank, because I was your stereotypical, well, maybe that's unfair, but I was what people would assume was a pot smoker. Just a complete lack of motivation, lack of ambition. And it affected me to such an extent that I recognized it in myself. And I just, one day I just stopped enjoying it, frankly, is how it went. One day I was not, and that's probably because the weed we have now is so damn strong. And you got to be very careful. Just, I'm a hitter quitter. And I think just too many bad experiences and just too much else going on in my life otherwise. But yeah, I look forward to a point in time where I kind of can, um, you know, partake. But there's a difference. So let me be clear. I don't think psychedelics cause the same issues that cannabis does. I don't put them in a category. I wouldn't even really consider them drugs. I wouldn't consider them drugs of abuse. Certainly not, because some people, you don't take a eighth of mushrooms and then fiend for it the next day, right? You're not dreading the come down from a psychedelic trip. So I put psychedelics in a category all its own, and I would encourage everybody. You're not going to go crazy, but you will potentially experience a shift in your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually talking to somebody the other day about um, psilocybin, and I was like, hey, do your research, because like there's so many studies out there available now that we can get research on those things. Like when I was a kid, there was no research. There was either try it and find out, or you're there was research on LSD, but it wasn't accessible when we were kids.
Yeah,
Like there was no internet.
no, no. And I do remember going to some of those forums like Blue Light and Shroomery just to
Yeah.
see what people would experience. But man, it was a different era when we were growing up. In Miami, which I'll just say this for the record, Miami is not the place that you want to raise kids. My mother, who we stayed with, Karl and I, was a college professor who worked full time at one of the local universities, and we were homeschooled for a period of from sixth grade to ninth grade. And what homeschooling amounted to was essentially our mother going to work and leaving us with a handful of assignments to be completed by the time she got back, right? And they always were. But in the interim, we had free reign to basically just go all around town and hop on the bus, hop on the metro rail, is our mass transit that we have here, and go to some of the more unsavory parts of town. And dude, I was wild at the age of 12, 13. I was experimenting, and I don't have kids now, but if I did, I would not want them subjected to those types of temptations. And
Yeah.
I would consider homeschooling them, but I'm I would not be as hands off as my mother was. And that wasn't necessarily her choice, right? She was a single mother. She had to work, and she loved what she did, and she saw something in the public school system that frightened her. And I think uh, now, what are we, 30 years later, it's kind of come to pass. And
Yeah.
uh, I agree. I think there's a lot to be fearful of coming from our public school system. So
Yeah, Carl and I got into that a little bit on our podcast we did, and he was asking me how I felt about public versus homeschool, and I'm all for homeschool. However, where I'm at, it's not conducive to a great experience socially for the kids because there's no programs outside of public school for like extracurriculars and like dances and friends. And like, of course, there's citywide sports. We could do that, but my kids aren't sports kids. And so the biggest reason I chose to keep my kids in public school was the social aspect of it. And
sure.
I had a conversation with my 14-year-old. Um, and this just not very long ago. As a matter of fact, this last school year, we had a conversation with him about public versus homeschool. And I talked to him. I was like, son, I don't feel like you are learning the things that you need to learn to be a productive adult at this moment. And I
Mm,
said, your grades are slipping. That's fine. We can live with the bad grades. What I can't live with is you not learning anything at all. And that's the trouble that I'm running into in public schools. They're not learning anything at all. They're memorizing stuff, sure, but they're not really learning anything. I need my kids to learn how to think, not what to think. And that's basically, in my opinion, that's the only drawback of public school is they don't really teach them anything. And what they are learning, it's they're not learning how to think, they're learning what to think.
yeah,
And
it's a tragedy, and I don't know how to fix that, man. I think
I don't either.
we've lost so much of our. It used to be everybody went to church, right? And we had a group within that environment where people were like-minded. You had a community. If you needed to go out of town, you would leave your kids with the parents of your kid's friend, and I think we've lost a lot of that community. Um, and yeah, I don't think public school is equipped to teach kids in a way that is effective or resonates with them. In my case, by the time I went back to public school, after I was homeschooled for middle school, I did go back to a public school. And, you could argue that I maybe had missed out on some important socialization as a result of being kept out of public school. But man, by the time I was in, 10th grade, um, I just, even, let me, let me tell you a quick story. When I went to before I went to public school, I was enrolled in a private school, and my aversion and distrust of authority was very strong even at that age. And I grew up. I was born and raised a Christian, and I participated in those types of activities. But by the time we got back into, I think this was ninth grade, if I'm not mistaken, I went to a Christian school where we had a Bible class. We had a Bible professor who had zero credentials to his name. He just apparently was some guy who read the Bible and thought he was qualified to teach about it. And I remember one day he was giving a lesson about how God created Eve and used a rib from Adam to create Eve, and he topped it off with, and that's why today men have one less rib than women do. And dude, I cringed so hard. And again, I wasn't trying to cause a scene, but I just kind of sat there cringing, shaking my head. And then he was like, "You got something to say, boy?" And I spoke up. I said, "Yeah, frankly, that's not true." And we got into this big argument because he didn't like being called out in front of a group. I didn't want to go there, but he was the one that insisted. So then we said, okay, let's talk to the science teacher. And he didn't know. Or if he did know, he was too afraid to say that this is complete bullshit. So when I witnessed that it was a profound realization for me that adults are morons. A lot, many of them, people that I had looked up to, people that I had assumed had my best interests, were complete retards. And I'm sorry if I'm not. I don't know if I'm allowed to
Oh
use that
no,
word,
you go ahead, man. Hey,
but
this is a non-PC here. We don't care.
okay. So yeah, and then that continued into public school, where the teachers that they had, these teachers that were you know kicking and screaming for more pay and better benefits and more days off, did not know um, half of what they were professing to know, and
They
it
don't know
was
their ass from a hole in the ground. That's where we're at exactly right now. Is you and I, we can, as people, admit that we don't know,
sure,
right?
one
But
hundred
when
percent.
when you go and ask these educators, they either make up something or they don't elaborate when asked why. It's because I said so, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that type of ego-driven behavior that I think, back to psychedelics, I think people could benefit from, a shift in their frame of reference. Their strongly held sense of self is kind of, it's pretty quickly taken care of by a psychedelic experience. But yeah, some of them just didn't want to be embarrassed, and I just remembered butting heads with all of my teachers throughout all of high school. I ended up dropping out of high school, and I enrolled in it's not a GED. It's basically a high school diploma, but it was at one of these, back then we used to call them diploma mills, where you just say, "Yep, here's your homework. I'm going to do it on my own time. I'm
Yeah,
going
it's
to
a
take the test."
work at your own pace kind of I forget what they call them, but it's like a supplemental school. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm one of the many kids that I feel completely failed by public school. I feel like
Me
I
too.
but I will say, by the time I had graduated high school and I went back to college, like, man, it was a different experience, and I uh, I was getting basically straight A's, and I was very serious about it because I think it had a lot to do with, there were subjects that I wanted to study and invest my time in, and I was excited to learn about it. But you don't get that in high school anymore. And again, I don't know, or you don't get that in public school anymore. And I don't know what the answer is. I think
So
in
there's
my
actually
in
a lot. There's actually a lot there I wanted to unpack a little bit.
Sure, sure.
So, um, we talked a little bit about religion and psychedelics. I want to ask your opinion. You talked about religion in school and how you had a Bible class, and
Hmm.
there's I can't remember which state it was, but they're talking about reintroducing the Bible into schools.
Public
And
schools.
yes,
I don't know if they're even allowed to do that, but
I don't know
continue.
either. But what are your thoughts? Now, I'm not a religious type of guy. I am a Christian. I was raised Southern Baptist. Um, but I'm not religious. What I call spiritual. I believe in a God, if you will, and maybe not the biblical God, but I believe in a creator, um, or creation is what I believe in. But I'm not religious. And when that switch really happened for me was with psychedelics. And I've never been religious. I've always thought everybody, every religious person is just full of shit. I always believed that. But when I took psychedelics, that showed me there's more to life than what we see. There's more to life than what it appears. What are your thoughts on that? Are you religious or spiritual at all?
As I mentioned, I was raised Christian, and I kind of fell out of favor with the church in general and organized religion in general. There was a period back in the early 2010s where it was all the rage to be atheists, and we would be really really snide towards religious people, especially Christians, but also Islam. But I've kind of since grown out of that. While I wouldn't call myself religious per se, I would also describe myself as spiritual, and I think there are forces that are beyond our capacity to understand as human beings, and I think no matter how much our science progresses, no matter how small. We could look at the cosmos. We could look at quarks and gluons and subatomic particles. There will always be forces that we cannot perceive, either intellectually, scientifically, or otherwise. So I have to think that there is a being um, that is much more powerful than us, and I think the story of creation is one that our science isn't equipped to figure out, because the answer is very inconvenient. That it was a higher being. Call him God, call him you uh, Allah, call him whatever you want. But I don't think we get to uh, dead planet to intelligent life forms without a spark from something that is greater than us. That's, again, I don't. There are a lot of subjects that fascinate me, but I do feel that we are the creation of something greater, and I think that we are all linked spiritually, cosmically, and again, these are sentiments that are very hard to verbalize. It's more of a intuition. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And
again,
you actually feel that on a whole different level because you're a twin.
oh sure,
You know,
yeah,
like
yeah,
you and your brother feel things that I would never feel with my siblings because you're that close. Like you're of the same sandwich, if you if you will.
yeah. It's a bizarre experience, man. Growing up as a twin. Trust me, it's weird, man, and I'm still not used to it. Knowing that there's somebody, and it's led to a lot of hilarious moments where my brother was a bodybuilder when he was in his early 20s, and he was going to the gym all the time and hanging out with these big meatheads, and they would come up to me assuming that I was him, and all I know is that I'm being surrounded by a bunch of big meatheads who I don't know their intentions, but it turns out they just had confused us, and laughs ensued. But it's yeah, it's pretty crazy experience. But like I said, you have siblings.
Yeah, I've got three siblings.
Yeah, so I mean, as close as you are to them, it's the same thing. Just again, I don't. I've got a elder brother who's 10 years my senior, but again, Karl is the guy that I spent most of my time with growing up. We're aligned on a lot of things, but we also scrap it out pretty other things. He was a cop, and he always wanted to be a cop. I think I told you off camera before that I was more of a First Amendment auditor type.
Yeah.
I did not like cops growing up. I had some pretty bad experiences with cops, and I felt that there was a lot, especially in the '90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of abuse happening in law enforcement, and I'm talking before the advent and mass adoption of body cameras. Cops would get away with a lot of shit, illegal shit, and I am a personal freedom advocate. I strongly believe in our Constitution, our First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, and if your police force is being deployed to infringe on those rights, then you're not the good guys. But this led to a lot of debates that I would have with Karl, and he ultimately, he was always a good cop. I've got nothing bad to say about the way he ran his show. He basically, of his own volition, decriminalized pot in his city.
Yeah.
Just decided. Even I think now it is officially decriminalized, but he and a lot of other cops realized, hey, this is not something we need to ruin somebody's life over. And
Yeah.
um, and I think police needed to evolve, and I think body cameras were a huge component of that. But when it comes to a lot of issues, Karl and I have gotten closer aligned. But I'm never gonna see the world through the lens of a cop, and I'm sympathetic to that worldview, having to feel like you need to look over your shoulder at every instance, treating every encounter as if it could be your last moment on earth. Like, that's got to wreak havoc on just your nervous system, right? And that's
Yeah.
an experience I fortunately was never subjected to. So I've got a lot of empathy for cops, but I think, the profession as a whole needed to modernize. And I think it's it's happening, but very painfully. And there's a lot of
Very, very painfully. Boy, my local police department here is, like I said, we live an hour north of Kansas City, but we didn't have a lot of those problems here. Our police force has always been kind of like blue collar here, if that makes sense.
good.
Um, they've we've got great cops here. Right now, we're having an issue with staffing, and our officers are really, really young here, and sometimes discretion causes an issue here. Sometimes, so I'm sure you're familiar with like dispatch. They use priority. This call may take priority because it's a more serious situation. But
Yep.
who makes those decisions? Sometimes that's an issue here where I live because there's not enough officers. We have less than 100 officers for 40 square miles.
Oh
And
wow.
that's, yeah, that's it's if you take across all three shifts, there may be 30 officers on shift at one time for 40 square miles. That's, I mean, that's dangerous, no matter where you're at. Um, and I think that a lot of issues with our police department stem just from lack of funding and I can't even say lack of training. They do a great job training our officers here.
But the root issue is that nobody wants to be a cop anymore, and because
Yes.
it's
And
been
Carl and I got into that as well. Like,
it's
go ahead.
I was just going to say it's been so demonized as a profession. I think the smarter move is to not be a cop, quite frankly, because man, like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And look, I will be the first to call out a bad shoot or corruption when I see it. But some of these guys want to do the right thing, but their hands are tied because of bullshit administrative bureaucracy
Politics.
and politics, precisely. And it's a job that's just become impossible to do. And Carl's very vocal about this, and I support everything that he says on the matter. And I think there are ways to modernize, but also remember that there's a reason behind tactics and the way things have evolved historically, and we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to completely pussify all of our enforcement agencies to the extent where they're all Uvalde, or they're all basically useless cops that are too afraid to do their job. They're too paralyzed with fear and anxiety to go in and do what needs to be done.
And let's
That's
be
I think
honest about that. Like, so I don't know if they're paralyzed with fear over, I think it boils down to politics, man. I think Uvalde wasn't, in my opinion, Uvalde could have just as well easily been the guy was afraid to be sued.
that's a terrifying possibility that I think you could be you could be right about that. But man, that's like some Demolition Man shit. You've seen that movie
Exactly.
before? Yeah,
Yes,
where
yes.
you've just got this feckless police department who cannot protect the public because of their orders. They're basically ordered to stand down and just be. They want a squad of social workers rather than people badasses that are gonna train and do what's necessary when the time comes. And man, that
And
I think that
there is a place for social workers in
sure.
police work. There maybe there would be a need for more social workers with police work going out on certain calls. Let's just say your local gas station calls the police department, says, "Hey, we got a customer down here won't leave," and he's just being a pain in the ass, just screaming, hollering, loitering. Do we really need police for that? Like, if the person's not dangerous, maybe we send an officer and a social worker. I kind of understand that point, but at the same time, like
I just know
it's
from ride-alongs with my brother and with other cops at other departments that those situations can turn on a dime, and
they can't.
it's
That's exactly right.
so I think there
You go
are
from needing a social worker to needing an ambulance.
exactly, or a SWAT team, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's things. It's a crazy world out there, and we need to have uh, people with the resources and training and bravery to do what needs doing. And I think, look, we're bound to figure it out someday. Otherwise, the alternative is we just let our societies and cities continue to devolve into chaos. But
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
I'm
think that's the answer.
I'm optimistic. It's Karl is not a cop anymore. He may go on with some other department, but there are great cops that are just their hands are tied and they're being undermined by uh, a feckless administration. And quite frankly, in my brother's case, an administration headed by somebody with zero experience or competency, it could be argued, somebody who got there for all the wrong reasons, and when faced with tough decisions to make, chose the wrong decision every single time. And
Now we see that a lot in business, right? Like in
sure,
big, large corporations that take on a new CEO that doesn't know what the hell they're doing.
well,
Um,
so in the defense of some of those CEOs, a lot of companies, and I've seen the data on this. Companies that are failing, or they've got some really nasty skeletons in their closet that they're all going to try to evacuate on their golden parachutes, and they'll put a woman at the top because this is yeah, you get to break the glass ceiling. Oh, your entire company is going to go bankrupt. So
yeah.
that's a really unfortunate side effect of business culture, and we can talk about. I don't know what your experience is in business, but I've worked for some pretty large companies before. Before I went full independent, up until COVID, I was working at Juul, the electronic cigarette company. And it was when I first signed on, man, it was an awesome place to work. The pay was great, and I believed in the mission, right? Because the mission, as stated by the founders, was to help the world's 1 billion smokers. But they were met with PR crisis after PR crisis, and at every step of the way, they made the wrong decision. There was a narrative that the devices were very appealing to kids, and that might be so. And you might look at ways to address and combat youth usage. What you don't do is send Juul employees into a school to give a seminar on the Juul device, which is a thing that they did. And it's there is incompetent leadership that finds themselves in these important positions that make important decisions that in the case of Juul, I ultimately up during COVID, that's when things just spiraled. They got lawsuit after lawsuit, and they ultimately laid me off, which sucked. I'd spent a few years working my way up. I was managing national distribution for them, and it was so frustrating to see when they were met with these challenges, they would do the exact wrong thing. They would make the worst decision possible, and I don't understand how that happens, frankly. But
I
ultimately,
think
it's
I think I understand. And again, Carl and I got into this a little bit too. I think it's a fake it till you make it culture. So everybody goes to these schools, these colleges to get these high dollar degrees. How much shit do they actually learn? How much business do they actually learn? My wife went to business school, and she said that the classes that she took, some of the professors weren't easy to understand. And then there at the end, we had COVID, and for the last year and a half, I think, her classes were all online. And like, how much are you really learning? You know, and now I have complete faith in my wife because she handles our business very well. But it is a fake it till you make it culture, man. And there is so many people with jobs that they don't deserve just because they applied for them and their application or their resume looked good. It has nothing to do with experience, has nothing to do with knowledge. It's just that that piece of paper that they sent them looked good. So they're going to give them a shot. And 2, 3 years in, when they're looking back, well, maybe we made a mistake. By then, it's too late.
Yeah, it's a whole new cast of characters running the show, and they are gonna do the whole song and dance about, oh well, the previous leadership made some bad decisions, and but we've changed a lot, and I remember at Jewel specifically, we had Altria, the parent company of Marlboro, come in with a massive $13 billion investment. And they did the whole song and dance. This is a tobacco company, a company that's responsible for the deaths of millions, which was completely antithetical to the mission of Jewel when Jewel first started. But they made a business justification because Marlboro Altria was going to put our product right on the top shelf next to their cigarettes. So it seemed like a good business decision, but there are a lot of people, including myself, that felt very strongly that, hey, this is not what we didn't set out to be, become puppets of the tobacco industry. We wanted to disrupt the smoking industry, but the
And
money just
I'm a smoker. I smoke cigarettes. I appreciate you, man.
oh
I
well,
hate it. I hate it.
dude, I was a smoker for 10 years, and you know I I've lost some really close people to cigarette smoking and lung disease. But yeah, and that's why I felt very strongly about, we were doing good work at Jewel, but again, just whenever they were presented with the opportunity to do the right thing, they did the wrong thing. And, they took that $13 billion investment and proceeded to just run the company into the ground with PR disaster after PR disaster. And it's a shell of what it once was. I think they did a documentary about it not too long ago on Netflix. But yeah, man, in it's completely new leadership now, and when Altria Marlboro came in, they did the whole song and dance about, oh, we love what you guys have done, we love the culture here, nothing's going to change, everything is going to be business as usual. But then they proceed to just change everything, and that really soured me to the whole corporate 9 to 5 gig entirely, and made me really decide, look, there is no job security in America in 2024. If you want it, you need to create it for yourself, and you need to work really hard and suffer and probably live off of ramen noodles for a little bit. But if you want a sure thing, don't rely on anybody else. And that's kind of been my ethos since then.
Yeah, that's been my experience in business as well. Like I'm not very experienced in business. I've not dealt with any large corporations other than like you said, working for them on
Yeah,
that end. I've never had any deals with any big companies or anything like that. But I can say like I do I'm intimidated if and when that ever comes. I am a little intimidated, but here's the thing, like I'm so authentic even to a fault. I will screw up a good deal because of something somebody said. Like um a CEO is slimy, and he's approaching me with this deal, whether it's a good deal or not. If I don't trust that person, I'm not going to take the deal. I will let a good deal walk because of a bad interaction.
sure. And I think that intuition is something that you need to listen to. It's served us well for millennia, and people people get a gut feeling that often turns out to be the correct interpretation. When you look, it's very easy to get distracted by money and talk, but sometimes it's a feeling. There are some, we do a lot of spec work now for clients. I I now work exclusively doing media production for clients of various sizes. Some small, like rappers, artists, music videos, commercials for companies. and then I also print T-shirts. But I learned pretty early on in my business career that sometimes you need to fire your customer, and if they're, you know, not going to allow you to do your job, if they're going to try to micromanage you, or if they're going to try to, you know, insist that you bend certain rules, or you know, put yourself in a compromising position, you have to be able to walk away from them and tell them,
Yeah.
you know, no thanks, we're not going to be the right fit.
Yeah. I actually I had somebody come to me, oh, about 6 months ago now. I've been doing the podcast for about a month, and like it still hasn't taken off, but it's doing a lot better now than it was at the time. I had
Good,
somebody
good for you,
I
man.
had thank you. I had somebody come up and ask about a they called me and asked about a like an endorsement deal, an ad deal where I put an ad in one of my podcasts or several of them, and they pay me. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, that'd be great. Let's set that up. And then came the part where they told me that there was things I had to limit myself on. And I'm like, man,
Such as,
I couldn't have a certain guest that I wanted. And this
huh?
was now this guest is my best friend. So the idea was that I was going to wait until after all this ad work was done before I could have my friend on my show. And I was like, man, that's not what I want to do here. Like, I don't, why is that? And then when it was explained to me why, I understood the reason, but I'm like, is it really going to be a big deal? Is that like really what we're worried about here? You're going to let something like that screw up a big deal like this? And they're like, yeah, we kind of got to. And I'm like, well, I'm good without that then. Like, I just started, and I don't want to hamstring myself like that and have, just starting out, it's hard to have like people telling you what to do and telling you what
If
you
you don't
can and can't
mind,
do.
yeah, you don't have to divulge names, or if, feel free to, you know, limit what you say about this. But what was so unappealing about your friend to this organization? Was
They
there, is he?
close related. It would have been a nepotism type of
Ah,
deal if somebody would have
okay,
found out about it. If somebody would have found out that we were closely working together, it would have been a blatantly obvious conflict of interest.
okay,
And I understand that, but where we are, man, like it wouldn't have made a damn bit of difference. So I had 300 views at the like 300 total views of my channel at that time, and this is when they were talking to me, and now I've got over 10,000 views.
congrats, man.
So thank you. It's one of those things where like I didn't have the friend on anyway because it just didn't work out logistically. But to have a client be able like come to me and say, well, you can't do this because of this, and then I'm like, well, I don't want to do this then, because I this is my show, this is my thing, and for somebody to come in that's totally unrelated, yeah, okay, you may give me a few $100, but like, is that worth selling myself? Is I can sell a product, but is that a couple $100 worth my, like
Integrity.
exactly, exactly. And it ended up that deal is still being worked on, but it's so I don't uh I don't count on it to come to fruition because so many things have happened since then. And then, of course, my best friend has been on the show and all this, that, and the other thing. And it's a wild thing. Like I was really excited about it at first, but then there came that little hitch, and I was like, I don't know. I don't think I'm good with that. I was talking to my wife, and she's like, "Wow, that's really exciting." And I was like, "Yeah, but there's this little catch." And I told her what the catch was, and she's like, "Oh, fuck that." I was like, "I agree. I'm glad you agree with me on that." And she's my business manager. So if she would have told me to do it, I would have done it. I wouldn't have been happy about it, but I would have spun it in a way that I could have, it would have worked out to my advantage.
Well, good for you on, you know, trusting your instinct, man. I
Thank you. And that's the bottom line. Like when I started this deal, it was going to be mine. You know, I didn't want anybody to push me around. And it started out as a hobby. And because I love podcasting, I love podcasts, I love every bit of that. And this was supposed to be like a hobby to talk to people, but now that I've been doing it for 7 months now, it's an amazing fun thing to do, and I'm looking at it as a job now, and not necessarily a commitment because like I could stop at any time, but it's I can't even describe the amount of fun that I've had just in the last 7 months with this whole thing and talking to people like you and Karl and Julian. I had a podcast with Julian. Never in a
really,
million yes, yeah. I
wow, that's
recorded let's see
is
when
it
that was.
is it out?
Yes.
I gotta
Yeah.
check that out,
So
man.
it's I gotta
Because
go to my YouTube page now.
Carl and I are very interested in setting up a podcast. You know, we don't know because look, Carl is a very, you know, he's a very talented guy. He's a musician. He's a camera operator, director, writer. You know, he's a Renaissance man. I'm, you know, very similar on the creative side. I'm a musician as well. I also love producing content. So I don't know if it's something. I know he would probably do well on a podcast about law enforcement. Um, but I also just enjoy conversations and you know shooting the shit about topics as disparate as UFOs to you know conspiracy theories on assassinations. So
If
it's a
there's
great.
anything I can do to help you make that decision to do it, to get into
Mhm.
the podcast, man, let me know. Because it's not a huge moneymaker because this is the only thing I'm doing. I'm not advertising, I'm not pushing anything out. This is all I'm doing, literally. And my editing is not as good as I would like it to be because we've only got one camera and it's a webcam and it's not the greatest, but we're working on things. It's only been 7 months. We don't have any prior experience. Neither one of us have any prior experience with production, media production, sound, in none of that stuff.
You figure it out,
But
man. And the beauty of you know today's golden age on YouTube and all these other great resources is you figure it out as you go. And man, when we put out the documentary, it was daunting. You know I knew it was going to be long. I had no idea it was going to be 2 hours long, and you know that process of making that documentary because a lot of it was still coming out. We were still waiting on, you know, things to develop, documentation to be released. You know, the all in it took about a year just in front of a computer every day, refining and tweaking and getting that thing to where you know we were satisfied with it. And I there was no money in it for either of us, right? There was no guarantee that anybody was going to even watch it, but I felt it was an important story that needed to be told, and I'm thrilled with the response that all 27,000 views that it's gotten. You know, on YouTube, that's not that's not much, but I'm thrilled with just the response and specifically the feedback and the outpouring of support that's come by way of that documentary. So I if there's a way we could produce content that doesn't involve nearly as much, you know, cutting and, you know, refining, if we could just put out conversations as is, that would be a huge time saver. And if people enjoyed it, then that's absolutely something we would keep doing.
well, you know how painstaking the editing process is with your work. With this, it's pretty easy. What do you use to edit with? Are you using we use Premiere Pro.
I use Premiere Pro. Carl is you know, we bounce projects back and forth with each other, and it makes it challenging because he's a Mac guy, I'm a PC guy, and I run Premiere Pro and the entire Adobe Creative Suite. I hate them as a company. I think they're predatory. I
Me
remember
too.
I was paying for an Adobe stock subscription, and you know $30 a month for a couple of years, and it I only realized that, oh, this doesn't actually give me access to all this stock footage. I still have to pay for it at a huge premium if I want a license for it. So I yeah, Adobe is a terrible company, but as far as their software goes, Premiere Pro and sometimes After Effects I'll use, they are industry standard. And Carl, on the other hand, is a Final Cut guy. And if you ask me to, I wouldn't even know how to work a Mac if you asked me to. So
Me either.
it's makes it a little challenging bouncing projects back and forth, but we've made it work.
Yeah, so if so you know how Premiere Pro works. And with our editing, we just edit we cut the beginning, we cut the end, and put our intro in the beginning. It's very light editing throughout
Hmm.
the whole thing. Like if there's extra long pauses, we'll cut those out. If
Okay.
there's a flub where I may have said the wrong information or um, just flubs, we'll cut those out and mash them together. But it's very very light editing. And like for an hour of podcast, it takes about an hour and 15 minutes to edit, because we will go and we'll watch. Well, I say we, I don't do any of it, my wife does. But we'll go through and watch the whole thing to make sure that all the sound is good, everything, that no cuts need to be made or anything. Then we'll put an intro at the beginning, outro at the end, and call it done. And that's essentially that's how podcasting is done. Julian Dory puts a lot of work into his, a
I can
lot of
tell.
work.
I can tell.
It's
And he was, I'll be honest, he was kind of the inspiration behind using some of those movie clips because I was terrified of using anything copywritten.
Yeah.
And I reached out to him. I think he had done a podcast. Man, I don't remember which one. May have been something with the CIA, but he was using um, clips from a movie, and I reached out and I said, "Hey, does YouTube ever give you any shit for copyright?" And he said, "No, it's fair use." So I looked into it, and just recently, 2023, there was a landmark uh, Supreme Court case that I think really freed up our ability to use. Obviously, you can't just rip off an entire movie and play it, all the way through. You can't. But if you're transforming it, if you're using it to to tell a story that otherwise you'd have a hard time communicating, you're free to use it. So I really enjoyed. I had a lot of fun putting that documentary together because I'm a huge movie buff, and as Carl is talking on camera and telling me, he's recounting this story, I'm imagining it in my mind's eye through the movies that I've seen. So like in the very intro where you've got the T-1000, scoping out these houses, I had a lot of fun with that, and I credit Julie and Dory with kind of the inspiration behind doing that
Hell
because
yeah.
it makes it a
Hell
lot more
yeah.
interesting too. And you get to
You're
have
absolutely
fun.
right. It does. And as I was watching your documentary, that's I kept thinking like, man, the production on this is so good, and the
Thank you.
storytelling is spot on. And I kept thinking about all the work that must have went into all Carl kept all the receipts, so
Yeah,
how all the work that went into pouring over hours and hours and hours of interviews and cutting that together and shortening it down and still capturing the entire story. That
yeah.
was had to be extremely difficult, but you pulled it off, man. And the
Thank you.
documentary from beginning to end kept me on. Now I love stories. I love podcasts, and it's not anything for me to listen to a 4 hour podcast all at once. So I do have severe ADHD though.
Okay.
That's another thing. So it kept my attention from the very beginning to the very end. And when I was done, I had to talk to you guys. I just had to talk to Karl. And then when I found out that you guys are twins, and of course I knew that you and your brother worked together to do the documentary because you had came on Julian Dory's live chat, and we had that discussion. And I was like, man, I got to talk to these guys
Yeah.
because
Well, I'm so
The
glad you reached out, and again, thank you for the feedback. It's so nerve wracking, as I'm sure you can relate. You know, putting something out there, not knowing, like, you think it's good, you think there's something valuable that we're communicating, and I really did. I again keep going back to, this was a story that demanded to be told. It was a just from beginning to end, and I wanted to do it justice. We've never produced anything like this before. But my brother, because he's so integral to the story, and because he's the the principal witness, he had to remove himself. It would not have felt as genuine if it were him, because look, we all have biases. We have, we have strong feelings, and we need to kind of sometimes take a step away and look at the broader view. And he just couldn't do that because he was in the shit. He was in the thick of it. And my task was to take all of this documentation and convey it in a way that, just as a neutral third party observer, even though he's my brother and I'm going to take his side on most issues, my goal was to keep him honest. And that's why we we did it that way. And I think we did it effectively, because we showed the receipts, right? It's not him
yeah.
making wild claims. It's not him, saying something that cannot be backed up. We backed up everything, and it's all part of the public record too. So we can be fact checked. And I welcome, we've gotten very little criticism on YouTube, which is pretty crazy. Like, maybe out of 300 comments, maybe one or two that people that are kind of
Saucy.
critical, saucy, sure. And but I would welcome people that have problems with our accounting of events to get the public records. It's all out there. And
Yeah, I did ask Karl about that, whether you guys had to FOIA anything.
no, fortunately, and again, this goes back to how astounding it was to me that these people are. Look, man, I don't know if it's, they fucked up, right? They brought checkers and crayons to a grandmaster chess match, and Karl is a very competent, very intelligent guy. He's good at his job, right? And the fact that they would target him on such weak evidence, and knowing that this documentation is out there for the public to see, just makes it all the more astounding. So, and again, it was a labor of love putting it together, and I tried to condense, 6 hours of interview recordings. It was probably hundreds of hours of city council footage and other things that I wanted to condense to tell this story. And I think they put themselves out, right? They were the ones that started this whole charade, and apparently weren't thinking about how this would reflect on them if the truth came out. So my goal was to simply just put the truth out there.
Man, I really wish I would have kept recording when I talked to Karl, because I, I tell you what, the conversation that we had after that you and I and Karl had after I recorded with Karl, there was some moments in there, and it reminds me of how I feel about my brother. And I'm not a twin. Um, the love and admiration that you showed for your brother during that interview, it's like I don't even know how to describe it. It caught me like, wow, it's really impressive to see that other people feel about their siblings the way I feel about mine. And
Yeah, and there's probably a reason why that was off the record. We we try not to get all you
mushy.
know, yeah, we don't want to be mushy, but I do love my brother. I love him more than probably anybody on this planet. And the fact that he was targeted to be, basically have his character assassinated, have his career ruined over such bullshit, it infuriated me, man. And look, I it was a product of love for my brother and just unbridled rage that I stayed in front of that computer for, probably a year, 8 hours a day, just refining. Oh, what was that? Oh, what was that you said? Okay, let's just want to make sure, transcribing. And this was Premiere Pro now transcribes all of your stuff for you. But
I
I
didn't know
hadn't,
that.
yeah, it's a great feature. If you ever want to run captions or create a caption track for your YouTube videos, Premiere
Yeah,
will do all of that for you. You do have to go in and refine some of it because it doesn't get all right 100%
right.
of the time. But yeah, I had manually transcribed a lot of those interviews, and
Oh, wow.
yeah,
6 hours of interviews manually transcribed. And then on top of that, the city council stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Well, I transcribed hundreds of hours of city council stuff because here, and this was an innovation that was super helpful, especially if you're producing long form content, and because there's no way I'm going to sit through 100 hours worth of city council footage because most of it's super boring. That's it's completely irrelevant and not interesting. So I transcribed all of it this time using Premiere's feature, and then that allowed me to search the transcript for keywords. Right. So
Oh, that's
it's
awesome.
yeah, I basically created a database, a text database that would allow me to reference. Okay, this was said at 3 hours, 27 minutes, and 16 seconds, and super helpful and absolutely something I'll do again. At anytime I have to pour over mountains and mountains of content, it's really, really awesome feature.
So note to the editor. uh, yeah. So yeah, when you're talking about thousands or hundreds of hours of footage and pouring over that and having to transcribe all that, it makes me think of some things that go on in the city that I live in. So the city I live in, it's about 75,000 people, give or take.
Okay.
We're an hour north of Kansas City. But here's my problem. When something happens here, the news of whatever happens here does not leave here. So nobody outside of here hears about the bad things that happen here. Not that a whole lot of bad things happen here, but our school district a few years ago was investigated by the FBI. It
Oh
made
wow.
national news. Um, but nobody latched onto it because it wasn't that big of a deal. They had embezzled millions of dollars of funds, and it was it was a big deal at the time for us, but the news really didn't make it out past here. It about Kansas City is really where people stopped caring.
Yeah.
And when things happen here, nobody knows about it, nobody hears about it, and we have some of the most entertaining school board meetings that I've ever heard. And that was
And
another inspiration for me to get into this, is because nobody hears about that shit.
are they all public recorded?
Yeah, yeah,
Or
it's all on
yeah.
YouTube. So, and
Yeah.
I
So look, if you wanted to, like just in the case of that FBI investigation, you could, in theory, download all of those publicly available videos, put it on a Premiere Pro timeline, and set it to auto transcribe everything. And then you've got a searchable text database that you can look for keywords. You can, it's it's a phenomenal research tool, and that's definitely something I'm going to continue doing. As you know, we'll probably, I can't say a lot, but there's another documentary, similar story actually to what my brother experienced, except it's quite a bit darker, and the outcome you could argue is quite a bit worse. And it's somebody, very sweet person, a female at a different police department, that we, Karl and I, really want to help out because they did her dirty too, and arguably in a much more ugly fashion. So I'm going to employ a lot of the same techniques, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but I want to. It's a much simpler story as compared to Carl's, and probably looking to do maybe like a 30-45 minute video just to help her out, just to get her story out there, and kind of let justice be served. And this may be a continuing theme. This may be a content that we continue to produce because there's there's ugliness all around the public sector. There are things that they would rather people didn't call out, like, a school board being investigated by the FBI. And
Yeah.
I think we as citizens, with the resources available to us right now, we can be very effective journalists in calling out some of this, this bullshit and this behavior, with people that we've elected to represent us and our interests. So I'm very enthused about what the future has in store as far as content that Karl and I will continue to produce, and I'm excited for you too, man, because
Thank
look,
you.
this is a great platform that you have, and it's an honor to come on and have you, interview me and take an interest in what I've got to say. I'm a nobody. I don't I'm not
Oh, you're not a
a
nobody.
I'm no media personality, and I never wanted to be. I'm usually the guy behind the camera, but this has been a great conversation.
Hell yeah. I tell you what, man. I I didn't even I, I wasn't even thinking about, like, I just like to talk to people. I really like to talk to people. I like to talk to good people, good conversation. The conversation that we've had in the last hour and a half ish. I mean, we've been all over the place on topics, but it's still a conversation. It's a great conversation, gets people talking. And I'm sure you and I don't agree on everything. Like, we probably have a lot in common, and a lot of that probably has to do with our age. I'm 39, you're 39. So, it probably has a lot to do with our age and the things that we've went through together as a generation. But I don't think of, like, I said it once on, I interviewed a guy named Andy who runs a podcast named That UFO Podcast. And I said it,
I've listened. He's Scottish or British, right?
yeah, Scottish.
Yeah, Scottish. Yeah, I've so I think one day he just popped up in my Spotify feed after I was listening to Joe Rogan, and the guy's awesome. And I think he's sounds very honest. He sounds very intelligent, and seems to know what he's talking about. And he treats it with a seriousness that I certainly appreciate. So
Yeah,
continue.
and
What
that's
what were you gonna
exactly
say?
it. He's not goofy about it. It's my favorite UFO podcast. And when I was talking to him, I had said something early on in the interview that kind of took him by surprise. I had said, "You're the biggest personality that I've had on so far." And he just, made a look, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't have said that. My wife had pointed it out to me later on. And I was I was like, I at that time I was a little starstruck
Huh.
because Andy's, I love the guy and I love his interview style. I watch all his stuff. And at that point, I was like, okay, let's tone this back up a little bit. We're all people here. He's a guy just like me. And as a matter of fact, he's got a day job doing a similar thing to what I used to do. And um, all those things come together and make me understand, like, hey, these are people just like me. They had their humble beginnings just like me. And that's where the inspiration to holler at Julian Dory came from. He was doing a live, and I just messaged him, hey, would you mind being on my podcast and doing an interview? And it's like, no, not at all. And he actually remembered who I was. I'd been interacting with him for a couple of years on his podcast, making comments and interacting with him in the live chat and stuff like that. And he remembered who I was. I was very, I was like, wow, that's awesome. And talking to him, he was like, well, you've always shared my stuff. We've had, conversations on and off the air. And I'm like, well, man, you've been doing this for a long time. I've only been doing this a short time. I can't remember who I talked to a week ago, So, but he was very, very humble, and I loved talking with him. And that's an important thing for me to remember is anyone who I talk to on a podcast, or anyone who I talk to in life or on the phone or anything, they're just people. We're all
Sure.
just people, and just don't be intimidated by that. And it's all good. And I tell you what, I was actually more nervous for this conversation than I was with Carl's, because I've dealt with I've dealt with cops my whole life, you know. I've dealt with people like Carl my whole life. But as a new creator, you know, as a person, I really, really liked your work. And I wanted to tell you that, like, your documentary is it's worthy of the name documentary. There's a lot of crap out there on YouTube that is not.
That means a
And
lot, man. And I can relate. There's a lot of stuff that they just threw a AI voice on, and it's unwatchable. And you know, I like I said, I had never done anything like this before. This is the longest piece of content I've ever produced. But again, that was all driven by this is a crazy story that people need to hear, and the fact that it's resonated with you, it's resonated with other people is really yeah, it's very heartwarming to me because, like I was saying, when you put something out there into the ether, you don't know how it's going to be received, and you know, I'm very grateful with the response that it's gotten. It's given me the confidence to continue to pursue this medium. And dude, there are imperfections galore in it. When I watch it, like I see some of the, you know, bubblegum and shoestrings that are holding some things together. There's sometimes where the font is a little bit different or it's a little bit out of place, but I don't fault myself for that. You know, I had watched it again. When you've got something 2 hours long, and you're refining it down, it requires watching a 2 hour movie basically multiple times per day. And
yeah,
it had gotten to the point where both me and Karl were just sick of it. We were just like, get this out of my face.
I'm
And
done.
yeah, done. You know, we had gotten it to a point where, and you ever like, do you ever say a sentence or you get a sentence stuck in your head and it starts to lose meaning, or a
Yeah.
specific word or phrase that you've used your whole life, but then you just start questioning, does
I'm
this,
sorry. That's
what's
one of
that?
those phrases. I'm sorry. That's one of those phrases.
Oh, wow. Um, so I was continually watching it day in and day out, and you know, sometimes you just have to take a break. Sometimes you just got to take a step back and and reset your brain. And it was getting to a point where you couldn't have paid me to watch it again just because I could recite it word for word. And that was the time when both Karl and I decided, okay, let's go. Let's put.
Think I think I think I've actually been in the same spot a time or two myself, just with different things other than like editing and stuff like that. Like this is amazing fun for me, and I'm sure there'll come a time where it feels like a grind. But at this point right now, I'm not quite there. But I'm actually dealing with a lot of burnout in my daily life here. I haven't taken a break in about 2 years,
Oh wow,
and my wife, bless her heart, she hasn't gotten to take a break in longer than that. And she works a full-time 40-hour a week job, plus she has a second job. She does a well, I don't really want to talk about it because, you know, self censorship type stuff. But she has a second job where she goes part time, and I help her with that job, and it's about 4 hours a day, 2 hours for me, 2 hours for her, and it pays as much as a full time job. So we do that in the evenings, but we are so burnt out from just life in general that I feel you, man. Like waking up in the morning, and like a lot of people ask me, what, how stay at home dad, and you know, how is that thing? And I'm like, it sucks, you know. And they're like, you know, Karl and I got into that a little bit, you know, when I was talking to him. I was like, it's not that it sucks. Like I love being a stay at home dad. There's no better job in the world, in my opinion. Um, I love every bit of it, except for when I'm burnt out, there's no outlets for me. Like, and my wife is just as much burnout as I am, if not more, because she has that full-time job that she's got to
sure.
worry about as well. it's just like, man, when we need to take a break, and I can't wait for school to go back into session, because that's when, like, this whole thing, like, so when I was doing it the first few months, it was kind of a trial and error, you know, do do what you need to do and put it out. And it's not like that anymore. I'm able to take my time. I'm able to be selective with who I pull on and what I do. And I'm going to try some new things when school comes back into session, but I just can't wait for the day where I can just breathe without there's a bunch of kids around, and
Mm.
it's I have no break at all. Like, they're here 24/7, and it's very monotonous, and I can totally sympathize with how dealing with that 8 hours a day
Yeah.
and
And with
pouring over that information. I definitely understand how that gets monotonous, and how you wouldn't. But I'm so glad that you guys came together and were able to get that out. And and I wouldn't have ever been able to tell that Karl was your brother, and unless you told me. And that's awesome for that not to come out in the documentary that you guys are brothers.
Yeah, and we had kind of spitballed a few different formats, like question and answer. We had just been brainstorming on, really the best way to tell the story. And Karl is not he's a very intelligent guy. He's a very got a big vocabulary, but he's not a classically trained public speaker.
Yeah.
So uh,
I would have never been able to tell. He's so good at it.
Well, I'll take some credit for that because there are quite a few ums and uhs that we had to deal with. There's quite a few, but for the most part, he killed it. And I don't think for most sections we kept the first take, and because at that time the story was still very fresh in his mind, and he was still, you could see it in how he conveys the story. It was still very emotional and traumatic for him,
Yeah.
what he was put through. And I felt it was important that we started filming right away. We experimented with different camera setups, but ultimately we just decided, you know fuck it, let's shoot it, and let's just put it in the timeline and see where it goes. And that's that's probably the most fun out of the whole process. It's also one of the most intimidating parts when you look at just a blank timeline. And I think originally, I'm a huge movie buff. I really nerd out on screenwriting, and there's a book called Save the Cat, which basically outlines a typical hero's journey Hollywood production, right? It starts with an inciting incident, and then you meet this person, you meet that person. And I basically put all of these story beats on my timeline, and tried to, we filmed everything basically sequentially, but it was necessary, I felt, in some parts to revisit. Let's go back here. Let's move up here. So, but that was the funnest part, starting with a blank canvas and seeing where does this story go? Where is it going to lead us? And I'm very proud with the final result because, again, it was a zero budget production, right? We had no money. I was basically living off of my crypto investments, which had been funding our production company, helped me, buy equipment. But then during the production, basically towards the tail end, where things are really, the pressure's really mounting, I'm getting so sick of watching it, but there's still so much that needs to be tightened up. My crypto exchange that I had my funds on was hacked, and basically all of my money was gone. I became basically poor overnight. And I'm the first person to tell you, not your keys, not your coins, and cold storage all the way. I don't know how familiar you are with crypto, but I was actively trading. I was flipping basically every day to eke out small profits to basically live on. That was my source of income, chief source of income, especially through this year of putting this documentary. It took my whole focus. So when that money went, man, it got really sketchy, really hairy, because I didn't know how I was going to feed myself. I didn't know, am I going to get evicted? Fortunately, a really good buddy of mine came through, Mike Rodriguez in Miami, Florida, the print yard, and he taught me how to make T-shirts, design and print T-shirts. So he basically kept me from going hungry, and now my goal is to really help him and his business thrive. So I owe him a lot of credit. The documentary would not have come out without his help and him stepping up to help me
Hey,
out.
let's give him
So
a shout out. What's his business name again?
it's the print yard in Miami, Florida, theprintyard.com.
Theprintyard.com. Note to
Yep.
editor, would you link that into the description, please? And the
Thank you.
print yard, that's awesome. That is well, we can't do this. We can't do these things without our friends, man.
No way, man.
There's like I was talking about that buddy of mine, my best friend. He lived with me for God, like 5 years, and he's old enough to be my dad. So it's kind of weird. Back in 2014, he had a falling out with his wife, and he moved in here. And I didn't know him. He's from Tennessee, and I didn't really know him. I I knew his wife, and I just happened to be looking for a house sitter when he needed a place to stay. And I was like, well, hey, while you guys figure things out, we're going to Disney World. We need a house sitter. And he's like, count me in. When we came back, he had he'd made the decision that he wasn't going back home. And we had overspent at Disney World. And he was talking to me. He was like, well, man, down the street here, there's this place that, $400 a week or $400 a month, and I can have a bed. And I was like, well, hold on a minute. Would you rather stay there or stay here? Because we overspent at Disney World. And as it turns out, you could just pay me $400 a month. I'll do your laundry. So that's ended up what we did. We became best friends. And I don't know where I'd be without the guy. Like
It's awesome.
he says I helped him, but he helped me. And so maybe it's similar for you and your friend at the print yard, you know.
100%. And this is a guy that I would 100% take a bullet for because, look, man, I've no he's a phenomenal musician. I played in bands with him. We did some cover shows playing the Deftones together, and he's such an awesome like good dude. And I had been helping him out. I do some web development stuff, and I had been helping him out on his website. And you know, when I was knee deep in the documentary, telling yeah, it's coming soon, it's coming real soon, and then one day, as we're meeting, talking about the web development stuff, he could kind of see I had a pretty distressed look on my face, and then I just told him, look, like I'm poor, bro. I might even need to abandon your project and go seek traditional employment ASAP because I don't know what I'm going to do beyond this week. And he stepped up in a huge way and really look. I owe him a lot, and Carl really wants to move. He hates Miami, which I don't blame him. But to the extent that I don't want to go anywhere. My allegiance and my loyalty is to this guy, at least for the time being, to help him kill it as much as possible in his business. So if anybody needs
That's awesome.
t-shirts, yep, we design and print t-shirts, do embroidery, hats, so on and so forth. So if anybody needs a hand, please reach out to theprintyard.com.
That's awesome, man. And I think that would be a great place to leave this conversation, man. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. Like, subscribe, and share, and check out theprintyard.com. And also check out Earthling Media. That's where this guy and his brother have a documentary about just some of the troubling stuff that came up in the North Miami Beach Police Department that led to the end of your brother's career. I implore everybody to check out that documentary on Earthling Media. Is that .com?
Yep.
Earthlingmedia.com?
Yep.
Awesome. And thanks for joining us, guys. Bye.